Hello everyone, I'm Carol, now 51 years old, living a life tinged with unforeseen challenges that began unfolding a couple of years ago. After turning 50, I was diagnosed with menopause, marking the onset of a series of relentless symptoms, dizziness, palpitations, and intense hot flashes among them. Although I'm under medical care, the treatments have only managed to alleviate these symptoms slightly. A cure seems elusive. Living under the same roof, my husband Anthony, who is 4 years my senior, has witnessed my struggles firsthand. Yet, understanding and empathy from him have been painfully absent. His recent outburst was particularly disheartening. As I struggled to stand, dizzy and weak, he accused me of using my condition as an excuse to avoid work and household duties. "Wow, I'm jealous," he scoffed, implying that my medically advised leave of absence was merely an exploitation of what he perceived to be a trivial ailment. Anthony and I met through mutual friends in our late 20s and clicked almost immediately. Our relationship evolved smoothly into marriage in our early 30s. While we've had our share of minor squabbles, life was largely peaceful, and Anthony seemed supportive. We dedicated ourselves to our careers, opting not to have children, and I believed we had grown close and supportive as a couple. However, the dynamic between us began to shift dramatically as I approached my late 40s. Initially, the signs were subtle: irregular menstrual cycles and sudden bouts of heat and exhaustion. But as time went on, these symptoms intensified. Severe palpitations disrupted my nights, and sleeplessness became a frequent tormentor. The physical ailments began to erode my mental well-being, leaving me irritable and despondent without cause. The journey through menopause is often misunderstood, spanning roughly a decade, with symptoms fluctuating before and after the cessation of menstrual cycles. Despite living through this difficult time, Anthony's recent comments have only deepened the divide between us, highlighting a lack of compassion that has reshaped the contours of our marriage. Experiencing menopause firsthand turned out to be far more daunting than I ever anticipated. My symptoms were intensely severe, and despite adhering to my family's encouragement to seek medical help, the condition showed no signs of improvement. During my hospital visits, the doctor explained that menopause doesn't have a specific cure. Instead, treatment focuses on managing symptoms. Consequently, I have been relying on a mix of prescribed medication and herbal remedies specifically chosen for their efficacy against severe symptoms. But even with these interventions, there was no cure in sight. It became increasingly challenging to continue my professional life, so 3 years ago, when I turned 50, I decided to take a leave of absence. My company's leave policy allows for up to 4 years off, and soon I'll face the tough decision of whether to return to work or retire. I'm not ready to give up my career, but the persistent severity of my symptoms is pushing me to consider retirement, a thought that fills me with frustration and uncertainty about Anthony's reaction. Initially, Anthony was empathetic and attentive when my menopausal symptoms began. He was never much for household chores, but he showed genuine concern for my well-being. I had always thought of him as a kind and caring person. However, his demeanor shifted drastically when he realized that my health issues might be long-term. He was visibly displeased when I brought up the idea of taking a temporary leave from work. "I don't understand much about your health, but is it so bad that you need a leave? You're not just slacking off and relaxing at home, right?" Anthony's skepticism was a shock to me. He mentioned that men also go through a form of menopause, perhaps trying to equate his experiences with mine. Despite having a chronic condition, Anthony rarely fell ill and managed his health meticulously to avoid exacerbating his illness. This perhaps led him to view me, who continued to struggle with health issues, as lazy. His response was always critical, no matter how extensively I explained my symptoms. So, what's the plan to improve? If that method doesn't work, shouldn't you look for another? Why do you keep saying it's not getting better? If it's not healing, find a way to heal. His lack of understanding was apparent and disheartening. Continuing to work in my current condition was incredibly tough. When I pleaded for a leave of absence until my health stabilized, Anthony predictably became furious. However, after learning that my boss, colleagues, and juniors had encouraged me to take a break, he reluctantly agreed, though he remained displeased. Determined to contribute somehow, I did more housework while not working. Yet, there were times when my efforts to balance health and home seemed overwhelmingly challenging. When I suddenly fell ill, the challenges were almost insurmountable. Standing triggered severe dizziness, and sitting didn't alleviate the relentless sweating, likely due to my hot flashes. On days when I mustered enough strength to vacuum, merciless back pain would ensue, no matter how much medication I took or how resolutely I endured the pain to manage some household tasks. Despite my efforts, Anthony's understanding remained painfully absent. "Aren't you better yet? What's the point of going to the hospital?" he would say. Over time, his demeanor towards me grew colder. Anthony often remarked, "If you're home all day on leave, why can't you finish all the housework?" He seemed to believe my illness didn't persist from morning till night. Returning home to find dinner merely cut up and heated, he'd ask, "What are you doing at home all day?" His complaints weren't occasional. They were a regular disappointment when he came back from work. On weekends, his presence only intensified the pressure. "Stop lying down all the time. Do the laundry at least." His words stung, especially when I was lying down, feeling unwell. The sarcasm and complaints escalated daily, and the once familiar words of care and concern vanished. Amid this growing strain, I was deeply troubled by the uncertainty of whether my symptoms would ever subside. However, I found solace in the understanding and advice from my mother-in-law, Amy, and my sister-in-law, Susan, who lived nearby. Amy, still robust and lively at over 80, spoke with clarity and energy. Having outlived her husband, she lived with Susan and her husband. Both Amy and Susan had been pivotal in encouraging me to seek hospital treatment and had even suggested taking leave when my symptoms worsened. I am immensely thankful to them. Since both my parents have passed away, Amy and Susan have become my primary support system regarding my menopausal challenges. Anthony recently announced that we were going to host a dinner party for Amy's birthday the following weekend. In Anthony's family, it is a tradition to celebrate family birthdays with a large dinner party. Since marrying into the family, I have participated in these celebrations every year. Depending on the year, we either dined out or hosted the party at the in-laws' house. This year, however, the responsibility of preparing the meal for Amy's birthday at our home fell on me. With Amy and Susan expected to arrive in the evening, Susan's husband couldn't make it due to work commitments, but Anthony made it clear he expected me to be in top form for the upcoming birthday dinner. "Make sure you're in good shape on the day," he said with a stern glare, adding, "I won't tolerate a repeat of last year." I could only nod in response to his sharp tone. Last year, during Amy's birthday celebration at my in-laws' house, I felt particularly ill and couldn't attend. Anthony perceived this as a personal embarrassment and berated me harshly upon his return. The memory of his words and my pain brought tears to my eyes even now. This year, I was determined to be as well as possible, as Anthony had demanded. However, the reality was that my condition wasn't something I could simply take away. If it were, I wouldn't have been suffering for so long. With Amy turning 81, I wanted to express my gratitude for all her support through the years. I started preparing for the dinner party well in advance, committing myself fully despite my unpredictable health. There was much to do, not just cooking, but also cleaning the house thoroughly. Anthony liked to impress, and he wouldn't be satisfied unless the house was immaculate. Over several days, I cleaned every nook and cranny, monitoring my physical condition closely. Anthony, true to form, didn't lift a finger to help, preferring to relax in the living room. In his view, consistent with the attitudes of his generation, housework was the wife's responsibility, particularly since he assumed I was idle all day. The day before the party, after finishing the shopping, I went to bed early, hoping the next day would bring only mild symptoms. However, I awoke to a severe headache and dizzy spells that made even getting out of bed a struggle. My vision blurred and a violent ringing in my ears accompanied the overwhelming pain, making this bout of symptoms particularly harsh even by recent standards. I managed to get out of bed clumsily, only to hear Anthony's frustrated sigh from above. Realizing I was in no state to prepare breakfast, let alone host a dinner, he grabbed his wallet and phone, and as he headed out the door, he remarked bitterly, "I'm gonna grab some food, and since I feel sick around you." His words and the coldness in his voice cut deeply, underscoring the stark contrast between the support from Amy and Susan and the lack of empathy from my husband. The tension in the house was palpable as Anthony's words hung in the air, icy and sharp. "I'm heading to Mom's early. Make sure dinner is ready when we return," he commanded before abruptly leaving. His voice was devoid of warmth, underscoring the inconvenience his impromptu plans might have caused Amy and Susan as well. His biting comments wounded me, yet I knew I couldn't afford to dwell on them for long. I sipped on a fruit drink, took my prescribed medication, and lay down in the living room, desperately hoping for some respite. But as the afternoon wore on, my condition showed scant improvement. The medication slightly dulled the headache, but every attempt to stand sent waves of dizziness through me, causing my legs to buckle. Dinner preparation loomed large, yet my physical state stubbornly refused to cooperate. I managed only brief intervals in the kitchen, each punctuated by necessary rests, watching as time slipped by. Frustrated and nearing my limit, I attempted to contact Anthony but received no response to my calls or texts. By 6 p.m., progress was painfully inadequate. When Anthony finally returned home with Amy and Susan, he found me seated weakly in the kitchen, surrounded by my meager attempts at meal preparation. He surveyed the scene with a mix of confusion and disappointment. "No welcome for Mom? Is dinner even ready? Nothing is properly set up," he remarked, his tone laced with disapproval. I had only managed to bake some bread and assemble a modest salad, and his words felt like a sharp rebuke. Anxiety gripped me at the thought of another harsh scolding. "I'm sorry, Anthony, this is all I could manage today. Could you please order something for the main course? I'm truly sorry," I managed to say, my voice faltering under the strain. This only seemed to ignite his anger further. "Are you joking? You call this sickness an act? We were all looking forward to a nice dinner. Mom was excited, and you're letting us down again, just like last year," he exploded in anger. "You can't even manage your health properly. It's embarrassing how you drag everyone down with you," he continued, his words cutting deep without any attempt to understand. "Why didn't you pick up when I called? I even texted you to suggest we eat out, and then another text about ordering delivery. Why insist on hosting at home if you can't handle it?" I snapped back, unable to contain my frustration any longer. Each word I spoke reverberated like a blow to my head, my vision so blurred that Anthony's face was just a haze. My ears rang with my heartbeat drowning out everything else. In our heated exchange, the physical toll became apparent. I was drenched in sweat, a direct result of the oppressive heat combined with the resurgence of my symptoms, which the medication had only temporarily subdued. I regretted raising my voice, but I felt compelled to explain my condition to Anthony once I could see again. When my vision finally sharpened, I found Anthony staring at me in shocked silence, his mouth agape. Then, as our eyes met, his expression morphed into one of fury, his face turning bright red as he pointed at me accusingly. "What's with that attitude, pretending to be sick, neglecting the housework, and then snapping when called out on it? You're the worst. I'm sick of supporting a wife who fails at her responsibilities. If you can't handle the housework, maybe we should just get a divorce." His words echoed threateningly through the house, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Despite my desperate pleas, Anthony seemed resolute, bringing up divorce without a second thought. The gravity of his words nearly brought me to tears. A separation felt unavoidable. Just as I was about to reluctantly agree, I heard light footsteps approaching. Anthony, consumed by his rage, didn't notice them. He continued, his voice dripping with disdain. "Menopause? Tiredness and shoulder pains, aren't those normal for our age? Dizziness and headaches can't be that bad even with medication. You just want to lie in bed all day, don't you?" Before I could respond, someone tapped Anthony on the shoulder. It was Susan, my sister-in-law, displaying a level of anger I had never seen in her before. As Anthony turned, Susan raised her hand and delivered a forceful slap across his cheek. The impact sent Anthony staggering to the floor, his face a picture of disbelief as he looked up at Susan, unable to comprehend what had just happened. "What the heck are you doing, Anthony?" he asked, rubbing his cheek, still in shock. Susan fixed him with a sharp gaze. "And what about you? What's with your attitude? Have you been treating Carol like this for years? Deciding the severity of someone's illness without any medical expertise? Verbally abusing your wife? You should be ashamed." Anthony, who typically tried to maintain a composed facade in front of the family, was visibly shaken. His behavior shifted drastically in Susan's presence. Normally dismissive and barely considerate when we were alone, he suddenly became attentive to my needs whenever Susan or other family members visited, even going so far as to make coffee himself. I had confided in Amy and Susan about my health struggles, but I had never spoken to them about how Anthony treated me behind closed doors. They were caring people, but discussing Anthony's harsh behavior felt risky. They might harbor ill will towards me for speaking ill of their relative. Even if they believed and sympathized with me, I hesitated to voice my concerns, fearing how Anthony might react if he knew I had shared our private conflicts. Seeing Susan's reaction today made me question my previous reluctance to speak out. "What's going on today is supposed to be Mom's birthday party. I wanted to make it enjoyable, but Anthony ruined the dinner by not preparing anything," Anthony said, pointing his finger at me as he stood up, eager to deflect blame. Amy, who had followed Susan into the living room, fixed Anthony with a stern gaze. "Are you saying Carol ruined the dinner party? That's just your opinion, right?" From what I've heard, Carol was doing her best to prepare despite her pain. She contacted you because it didn't seem like she could finish in time, suggesting a change of venue or ordering delivery instead. I don't appreciate being celebrated by someone unwell. I'm certainly not happy being celebrated by a son who just complains after dumping everything on his sick wife. Amy scolded him firmly. Then Susan chimed in. "Did you come to our house leaving Carol alone while she was feeling ill?" "Well, there's nothing I could do," Anthony replied defensively. "There are many things you could have done, like helping with chores or being considerate about her health. I remember telling you this when Carol first started feeling unwell. You just found it bothersome, didn't you?" Susan's words left Anthony speechless. Anthony, flustered, blurted out, "Why are Sis and Mom siding with her? Menopause isn't even a real illness. Getting tired easily, palpitations, that happens to everyone as they age. Women just want to be lazy so they can name it a disorder and pretend to be sick." Susan sighed deeply before explaining, "Anthony, you might not know, but I too suffered from severe menopause symptoms. It only recently settled down, but it was so bad I quit my job 9 years ago. Are you saying a disease that made me quit my job isn't a real illness?" Hearing this, Anthony stood frozen in shock. I had known that Susan had experienced menopausal issues around the same age as me, and that she had to resign from her job following a temporary leave. She didn't want to quit, but with no sign of recovery in sight, she had chosen to prioritize her health after consulting with her family. I remembered that Susan had stepped back from her job when she was around 50, but I hadn't known the specific reasons until she shared them herself. During that difficult time, we mostly communicated via text as she was too unwell to meet. It was a challenging period for her, and I thought about how she once confided that it felt like it would never get better. Jason, Susan's husband, who is 4 years her junior and works irregular hours, including night shifts, was always supportive of her health decisions, although he couldn't make it to the dinner. Susan turned to Anthony with a stern yet caring demeanor. "Carol is not your servant. As a husband, shouldn't you have more compassion?" Caught off guard and visibly chastened, Anthony muttered a weak apology. "Sorry, sis. I knew you were unwell, but..." His voice trailed off, finally understanding the gravity of his actions and the pain they had caused. Anthony's reply sounded like an excuse, but Susan's stern expression didn't waver. "Right now, it's not about me. Shouldn't you be apologizing to Carol?" she pressed firmly, facing pressure from Susan, whom he deeply respects and seldom contradicts. Anthony reluctantly turned towards me. After a moment, he seemed to relent. "I'm sorry. Sis scolded me and it opened my eyes. From now on, I'll help you, Carol, and we'll get along," he said, looking earnestly into my eyes. It felt like he might have finally understood. Just as I was considering forgiving Anthony, a voice cut through the moment. "Hold on a minute," said Amy, looking exhausted as she walked over supported by Susan and sat beside me on the sofa. She fixed me with a serious gaze. "Carol, you can't believe Anthony's words. You should divorce him, and quickly," she advised. "What do you mean?" I asked, taken aback by her directness. Amy then shared a bit of her past that mirrored my struggles. "I suffered from similar symptoms around your age. There wasn't a name like menopausal disorder back then, but from what you've told me, I think I probably had it too. I've told you this before, haven't I?" I nodded, recalling our previous conversations. "When I was about your age," Amy continued, "the term menopausal disorder wasn't widely recognized. There were no medications, and it was hard to find understanding from others." She chuckled sadly, then pointed at Anthony. "He used to hurl terrible abuses at me when I was suffering. It was around the time before he married you. He was living at his parents' house and would say things like, 'Make dinner faster. How long will you lie in bed, mother? Stop pretending to be sick.' Such heartless words," she recounted, her face shadowed by the painful memories. "Anthony, is that true?" I asked, hoping for some sign of denial, but Anthony awkwardly turned away, his silence confirming Amy's account. Amy looked down, sorrowfully continuing, "My late husband got so angry at Anthony's behavior back then that he hit him. When Dad scolded him severely, Anthony said the same things he's saying now." She sighed deeply. "He woke up indeed. After that, Anthony stopped saying anything to me because he quickly married you and left home. But Carol, you've been mistreated by him, haven't you? In other words, Anthony hasn't changed at all since then. He still doesn't try to understand others' illnesses, even after decades," Susan interjected, emphasizing that Anthony's current words were just excuses for the moment. "Wait a minute, I won't do it again, believe me." Anthony tried to interject, but Susan grabbed his arm to stop him. "I saw it all back then. That's why I hit you, just like Dad did. Remember how you cried and apologized to me after Dad scolded you? You said you wouldn't do it again, that you had woken up and realized your mistake," she recounted, reminding him of his past promises. Susan's stern reprimand left Anthony biting his lip in evident frustration, and as he fell silent under her gaze, Amy seized the moment to address me directly. Gripping my shoulders firmly, she spoke with urgency. "That's why you need to divorce Anthony and escape this situation quickly. Otherwise, you'll continue to suffer. Now's your chance, with me and Susan here to support you. Alone with him, he'll never admit his faults and might even resent you for embarrassing him in front of his parents." Her eyes were resolute, filled with a sad determination. Hearing such decisive words from a mother was heartbreaking, and the thought of divorce at this stage in life was daunting. Yet, Amy's recount of enduring similar mistreatment at Anthony's hands resonated deeply. I had clung to a hope that once my symptoms eased, life with Anthony could return to the happy days of our past. But the reality Amy painted was stark. Likely things would only deteriorate further. Anger and resolve welled up within me as I considered the years of verbal abuse Anthony had directed. Not just at me, but at Amy too. Despite the dizziness that clouded my senses, I stood up and faced Anthony, ready to declare my intention to divorce. Shaking off Susan's restraining hand, he erupted. "What the hell are you all doing, treating me like the bad guy?" The room fell silent, the cold stares of his relatives meeting his gaze. Overcome with rage, Anthony finally blurted out, "Fine, I get it. If that's what you want, I'll give you a divorce." His concession came angrily, and the dinner party was abruptly canceled. Amy and the others left, and Anthony, unable to face the situation, stayed at a hotel. The divorce proceeded without contention over property division and was finalized swiftly. After separating, I focused on healing alone, finding solace in the peace that followed our split. Half a year later, with no prior contact, I received an unexpected call from Anthony. By then, I had moved into an apartment and was regularly visiting the hospital, feeling less stressed and noticeably healthier. His call, predictably self-centered, revealed that his chronic illness had worsened since living alone. He had always prided himself on managing his health perfectly and had often criticized me for not improving despite his claimed superiority in self-care. "Why is that happening? You can manage your health perfectly, right?" I replied, my voice tinged with irony. Anthony's idea of managing his health had been superficial at best, relying on the balanced meals I prepared without ever cooking from scratch himself. Moreover, without anyone to maintain the housework, his living conditions had deteriorated significantly, leading to a decline in his health. "I can't live like this anymore, so I want you to take care of me. It's been half a year. Your illness must be cured by now, right?" Anthony stated without a hint of remorse. He had turned to Susan and Amy first, but with Susan already caring for Amy, he was left without support. Though I wanted to refuse, remembering our long history together made it difficult to ignore him completely. "At least look at these albums I found in storage. If you don't need them, I'll throw them away," Anthony added, believing they contained old photos. Hesitant, yet curious about the memories captured in those images, including times with Amy's family, I decided to visit our former home to retrieve my belongings. Arriving at the house we had shared until just 7 months ago, I was struck by the neglect it showed. The living space was dirtier than ever, with leftover takeout containers strewn about, a clear sign of Anthony's deteriorated lifestyle. "You know, without you here, I don't have time to clean. It's hard to move," he lamented, attempting to evoke sympathy. But standing there, amidst the chaos, I realized how far I had come on my own, and how little I wanted to return to the past. During my visit to Anthony, it became evident he was making excuses. While he lamented about his illness, his demeanor suggested vitality and energy, contradicting his claims of debilitation. It dawned on me that what he sought was not so much caregiving, but rather someone to manage household tasks like cleaning, laundry, and cooking. It seemed he was in search of a caretaker rather than genuine emotional or physical support. Taking a moment to assess the situation, I addressed him directly. "You appear quite robust and healthy. Maybe it's time you stop using your condition as an excuse and start taking responsibility for yourself." This direct approach took Anthony by surprise, and his response was defensive and sharp. "You know, my condition affects my internal organs and nerves. It's not just something you can see. Offensively, you call me lazy when I'm genuinely struggling," he countered, frustration evident in his tone. Despite his argument, as he met my unwavering stare, he seemed to realize the gravity of our conversation. Suddenly pausing, he took a deep breath, and with a softer tone, he offered an apology. "I was wrong to say those harsh things when you were in pain. I'm sorry, and I promise it won't happen again. Please." I cut him off, knowing where his plea was headed. "I'm sorry, Anthony, but I can't be the one to take care of you. My health issues are still a challenge, and I can't just forget all that's happened." Anthony appeared genuinely remorseful and continued to plead, "Please, my health is unpredictable. I could end up hospitalized at any moment, and I struggle with managing my diet and medication without help. I need you." While his words tugged at my heartstrings, Amy's earlier warnings echoed in my mind. His repentance could very well be a tactic to win sympathy. With this in mind, I gently yet firmly rejected his request. I'm already dealing with a lot on my own. The stress of being back in a caretaking role could set back my recovery. If you need assistance, some services and professionals can provide the support you need. I just can't be that person for you. Resolute in my decision, I returned to my own life. In the time since, I have managed to find a new equilibrium. My health has improved significantly, and I have returned to my professional life after a necessary break. While retirement was once a consideration, supporting myself and finding fulfillment in my work has brought a new sense of purpose. Though I no longer have any romantic ties to Anthony, I maintain a cordial relationship with his family, occasionally joining them for meals. The regular family gatherings, once a cornerstone of interaction, have ceased since our split. Rumor has it that Anthony has left his job under the pretense of focusing on his health. Though no tangible improvements have been noted, he seems to be relying on his early retirement savings, facing his days with a mix of resignation and apprehension about his health's uncertain trajectory. As for me, I remain committed to nurturing my well-being and embracing the peaceful independence of my new life.